Have you ever noticed how the human mind can be a prison or a gateway to freedom? How a thought can lift you to great heights or plunge you into the deepest abyss? Have you ever felt that tightness in your chest, that paralyzing fear, that sense that everything is lost, even when the solution may be right before your eyes? The way you think shapes your life. What dominates your mind governs your emotions, your actions, and even your destiny. The problem is that often you are trapped in a false narrative. The enemy whispers lies, and you accept them as absolute truths. You look at your difficulties and see yourself as small, weak, and incapable. But is this the reality, or have you been deceived by a distorted perspective? Have you ever heard of someone who died from fear? Someone who was perfectly fine, but was overtaken by despair and collapsed? What occurred wasn't the poison or the situation itself, but the belief in what they saw. And what if you're living the same way? What if what paralyzes you isn't the problem, but the fear it stirs up? Now listen closely. You were not meant to live in defeat. God has given you authority. He created you in His image and likeness. This means you are not a victim of your circumstances, but someone who can master them. What you believe defines what you experience. When God created humankind, He gave a mandate. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Genesis 1:28. This means there is a power within you that you may not have even discovered yet. But do you know what happened? The devil understood this authority and wanted to steal it. He deceived the man and the woman, planted the seed of doubt, and since then humanity has lived below its potential, trapped in fear, guilt, and insecurity. But God did not create you to be a slave to fear. He sent Jesus to restore that lost authority. When you receive Christ, you regain the power to govern your life, your feelings, your future. But this only becomes real if you decide to live out this truth. Have you been seeing yourself as defeated? Have you accepted words of failure, limitation, impossibility? Well, I tell you today, stop feeding those lies. Start declaring who you truly are in Christ. Say, I am a child of God, created to win. I have authority over my life. I am not a victim of my circumstances. I am more than a conqueror. If you don't change your mindset, your life will never change. Faith is not based on what the eyes can see, but on what the heart believes. And if your mind is filled with unbelief, no matter how many promises God has for you, they will not come to pass. You need to visualize victory. You need to see with the eyes of the Spirit. You need to see beyond the difficulties. When Abraham had no children, God told him, "Look at the stars, so will your offspring be." Genesis 15:5. Why? Because God wanted him to see before receiving. If you can't see your victory, your healing, your restoration, how can you expect to live them? The people of Israel in the desert were dying from snake bites. God commanded Moses to lift up a bronze snake and said, "Look at it, and you will be healed." Numbers 21:8-9. Healing came through vision. Likewise, your healing, your deliverance, your transformation will come when you look to Jesus, not at your problems. But I ask you, where have you been looking? At the difficulties? At what went wrong? At the past? At the negative words that were said about you? If you keep looking back, you will be like Lot's wife, who turned into a pillar of salt. But if you decide to fix your eyes on Christ, you will see life spring up within you. I know life has been tough. I know there are days when you want to give up. I know there are moments when everything seems dark, with no way out, no hope. But listen, hope is not dead. The final word has not yet been spoken. Maybe you are carrying a heavy burden, feeling weak. But Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. This means you don't have to fight alone. You can place everything in His hands. Now pay attention. There is something very powerful in the act of giving. The world teaches that happiness is in receiving, but the kingdom of God teaches that true joy is in giving. When you give of yourself, when you bless, when you love, when you forgive, when you share, you open yourself to receive even more. Many people live trapped because they hold on too tightly. They hold on to hurts, to resentments, to fear, to what they have, thinking that if they let go, they will have nothing left. But God says, "Give, and it will be given to you." A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. Luke 6:38. If you want to see changes in your life, start giving. Give love, give forgiveness, give generosity, give time, give words of life. And finally, look around you. Who has been walking with you? Who has been speaking into your life? Who has been shaping your thoughts? When Jesus went to perform a miracle in Jairus' house, he expelled all the unbelievers from the room. Why? Because unbelief hinders the move of God. If you want to see miracles, distance yourself from disbelief. Surround yourself with people of faith, people who uplift you, who make you believe, who push you to move forward. Because when you surround yourself with faith, the impossible becomes possible. Today, I challenge you, change your mindset, change what you see, change your words, change your company. Take hold of the authority that God has given you. Do not settle for less than what has been promised to you. And above all, believe, because those who believe will see the glory of God. Write in the comments, "My blessing is on the way." If you believe that God is already working in your favor, have you noticed how doubt steals your strength? How fear paralyzes you and makes you forget who you really are? Faith is not just a fleeting emotion, a thrill in your heart, a momentary feeling of peace. Faith is a decision. Faith is a stance. Faith is looking at the impossible and declaring, "I know in whom I have believed." The enemy does not fear those who pray, does not fear those who go to church, does not fear those who read the Bible. He fears those who believe, because those who believe cannot be stopped. What has the devil been doing to you? Has he been sowing doubts? Has he been planting thoughts of defeat? Has he been whispering in your ear that God has forgotten you? Because he knows that if he can steal your faith, he steals your destiny. But you can no longer accept these lies. You can no longer continue living a life below what God has prepared for you. You can no longer be a prisoner of words that weaken you, of memories that confine you, of feelings that destroy you. Today is the day to rise up. Today is the day to declare that enough is enough. How many times have you looked at your life and thought, "This wasn't supposed to be like this"? How many times have you found yourself lost, trying to understand what went wrong? I want to tell you something. God didn't make a mistake when he created you. God didn't make a mistake when he chose you. God didn't make a mistake when he called you. But you have been living far from the truth of who you really are. God gave you an identity. You are not an orphan. You are not forgotten. You are not a mistake. You are a daughter. And as a daughter, you have an inheritance. A daughter has a father who cares, protects, provides, and lifts her up. But to live as a daughter, you need to believe that you are a daughter. You need to stop begging for crumbs when the table has already been set for you. Are you tired of waiting? Do you feel like the promise is taking too long? I want to remind you that God is never late, but he works in the right timing. And do you know what this waiting period does? It shapes you, it prepares you, it tests your heart. Do you think God just wants to give you blessings? He wants to make you capable of sustaining them. If you are not ready, the blessing can become a burden. If you are not prepared, the answer can crush you. That's why God teaches you to trust. He teaches you to persevere. He teaches you to depend on him. Because your strength is not in the answer, but in the one who answers. And I ask you, where is your trust? Is it in what you can see? Is it in what you can touch? Or is it in the one who never fails? You need to learn to trust in God even when you don't understand, even when everything seems against you, even when doors are closed. Because listen closely, when God shuts a door, it's because there's a better path. When he says no, it's because there's something greater. But you need to believe. You need to stand firm. You need to stop looking back and longing for what's left behind. The people of Israel longed for Egypt, even after God had freed them. And because of their unbelief, many never entered the promised land. Do you want to stay in the desert, or do you want to step into the promise? Do you want to remain stuck in the past, or do you want to embrace the new things God has for you? The choice is yours. God has already prepared the path, but you need to decide to walk it. And I want to ask you, what has been stealing your joy? What has been draining your strength? What has been holding you back? Because there are moments when it isn't the circumstances that paralyze us, but the burdens we choose to carry. Have you been carrying weights that God never asked you to bear? Have you been holding on to pains that He has already asked you to let go? Have you been drowning in worries that He has promised to resolve? You were not called to live under a heavy load. You were not called to carry burdens alone. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." But you need to go to Him. You need to trust. You need to let go. Because while you hold on, God cannot act. While you try to solve things your way, God cannot operate. While you insist on controlling, God cannot transform. Let it go. Surrender. Release. Because when you let go, God holds you. When you surrender, God takes care of you. When you rest, God works. Have you noticed that the biggest battles occur in your mind? That the war isn't in the circumstances, but in the thoughts you feed. Because you can be in the midst of a storm and still have peace. But you can also be on a perfect day and be overwhelmed by anxiety. What governs your thoughts? What dominates your mind? Have you been filling yourself with the word or feeding doubt? Have you been declaring life or confessing defeat? Because your mouth prophesies your future. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. What have you been declaring about your home, about your family, about your future? Stop declaring what the enemy wants you to believe. Start declaring what God has already said about you. You are not a failure. You are not defeated. You are not worthless. You are chosen. You are loved. You are equipped. You are strong. You can do all things through Him who strengthens you. Do you know why many people don't experience the supernatural? Because they don't truly believe. They say they trust God, but they live as if everything depends on them. They say they wait on Him, but they panic at the first obstacle. Faith needs to be practical. Faith needs to be lived out. Faith needs to be manifested. If you believe, walk like someone who believes. If you are hopeful, live like someone who has already received. If you trust, rest like someone who already has the answer. And now I want to tell you something very serious. Stay away from those who steal your faith. Stay away from those who bring you down. Stay away from those who separate you from God. Because there are people who act like weights, draining your strength and undermining your faith. If you want to grow, surround yourself with people who uplift you. If you want to move forward, walk with those who have vision. If you want to see miracles, walk with those who believe. Because unbelief is contagious, but so is faith. And now I want you to make a decision. The decision to live above your circumstances. The decision to trust God, regardless of what your eyes see. The decision to no longer be a victim of fear, doubt, or insecurity. Because what God has for you is great. What God has for you is powerful. What God has for you goes beyond what you can imagine, but you need to believe. You need to rise up. You need to take hold. The last word has not been spoken. God's timing has not ended. There are promises that will still come to pass. There are doors that will still open. There are miracles that will still happen. But it all starts with a step of faith. So today, take this step. Today, choose to trust. Today, decide to live like someone who knows that God is in control. Because He who promised is faithful to fulfill. And if He said He will do it, then He will. Write in the comments, "I am more than a conqueror." If you believe that God is preparing great victories for you. Have you noticed that often the struggle isn't outside of you, but within? That the greatest battlefield isn't the world around you, but your own mind? There are moments when everything seems fine on the outside, but inside there's a whirlwind of thoughts that paralyze you. You pray, but it feels like God isn't listening. You cry out, but silence seems to be the only response. You believe, yet deep down you wonder, is this really going to happen? And as that doubt grows, it starts to steal your peace, your confidence, your strength. And what do? You keep trying to solve everything on your own. You insist on carrying burdens that God never asked you to bear. You worry about what could go wrong instead of resting in the certainty that God never fails. But tell me, how long? How long will you allow anxiety to rob you of your days? How long will you live as a slave to fear? How long will you postpone your joy because you haven't seen the answer yet? God didn't call you to live this way. He doesn't want you to spend your days worrying about the future. He wants you to trust. He wants you to live with the certainty that He is in control, even when everything seems out of place. But trusting requires surrender. Trusting requires letting go of control. Trusting requires handing over to Him what you've been holding on to so tightly. And I know this isn't easy. I understand that giving something up means letting go of what's safe, what's familiar, what you feel you have control over. But listen, you were never in control. You just thought you were. You were merely holding the reins, believing that would prevent the worst from happening. But the truth is, your strength has limits, your capacity has limits, your vision has limits. But God, He is limitless. He is already in your future. He has already paved the way. He has already written the story. And if you truly believe that, then why fear? Why worry about tomorrow, when the God who holds the universe in His hands is the same God who cares for you? Do you know what the problem is? You look at your circumstances more than you look at God. You focus more on the storm than the God who calms the storm. You pay more attention to the problem than to the one who has the solution. That's exactly what happened with Peter when he walked on water. As long as his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he walked on the waves. But the moment he started looking at the wind, at the force of the sea, at the impossibility of the situation, he began to sink. And how many times have you done the same? How many times have you started strong, full of faith, determined to trust, but suddenly something happened and you took your eyes off Jesus? How many times have you let fear, despair, or the voices saying it wouldn't work pull you away? But today I tell you, lift your eyes. Look to Jesus again. Remove your focus from the problem and place your focus on the one who can resolve any situation. Because the enemy wants to make you sink. He wants you to believe there's no way out. He wants to keep you trapped in doubt, insecurity, and disbelief. But you can no longer fall into that trap. You can't allow the winds of life to dictate your faith, because your faith should not be based on circumstances. Your faith should be based on the character of God. And if He promised, then He will fulfill. If He said He will do it, then it is already done. Now let me ask you, what has God already told you? What promise has He placed in your heart? What has He guaranteed would happen? Because often, in the midst of the journey, you forget what God said. Pain comes, the struggle tightens, discouragement arrives, and suddenly that promise that once burned within you becomes a distant echo. But God hasn't forgotten. God hasn't changed His mind. God hasn't revoked His word. If He said He would open the door, He will. If He said He would do the impossible, He will. But you need to stay strong. You need to keep believing, even when everything around you says otherwise. Have you noticed that God never works the way we expect? He never acts within human logic. He never chooses the most obvious path. He never does things the way we imagine. The people of Israel expected a Messiah who would come as a warrior, but He came as a servant. They expected someone who would dominate by force, but He overcame through love. They expected a king on a throne, but He came riding on a donkey. And today, perhaps you are expecting God to act in a specific way. Maybe you've placed your faith in a single path, in one solution. But God is working in a way you still don't see. He is moving pieces behind the scenes. He is preparing something far greater than what you asked for. But you need to trust the process. You need to stop questioning all the time and simply rest in the assurance that God knows what He's doing. And now I ask you, are you willing to wait? Are you willing to believe even without seeing? Are you willing to stand firm even when everything seems to say otherwise? Because the miracle doesn't happen on your anxious timeline. It happens in God's perfect timing. And if He hasn't done it yet, it doesn't mean He won't. It simply means He is waiting for the right moment. Now let me ask you, what do you need to deliver today? What burden have you been carrying that should already be in God's hands? What worry has been keeping you up at night, but He has already resolved? Because as long as you hold on, He cannot act. While you insist on trying to solve it on your own, He cannot do what only He can do. Let go, trust, rest, because God is in control. And in due time, He will do infinitely more than you asked or imagined. And when it happens, you will look back and see that everything made sense. You will see that every tear had a purpose. You will see that every closed door was a protection. You will see that every wait was a preparation. And then your faith will be strengthened. Your heart will be renewed. Your life will never be the same. So today, decide to trust. Today, choose to believe. Today, rise up with the certainty that God doesn't fail. Because the promise still stands, God's timing is still at work, and at just the right moment, you will see the impossible become reality. Write in the comments, "I can do all things through Christ," if you believe that God's power helps you win any battle. And when the impossible becomes reality, you will understand that every minute of waiting was worth it. You will look back and see that God was preparing you for something much greater than you imagined. You will realize that what seemed like a delay was in fact a time of building. But now I ask you, are you truly ready to live what God has for you? Because many times you ask, but you are not ready to receive. Many times you desire something, but your heart has not yet been shaped to support the blessing. You want the answer, but you don't want to go through the process. But God will not give you something that could destroy you. He will not pour blessings upon a heart that has not yet learned to trust. He will not open doors for someone who does not yet know how to walk in faith. So, before asking Him to give you something, ask Him if you are ready to receive it. I know that waiting is hard. I know that the time of preparation is painful. I know there are moments when the desire to give up is strong. But you cannot give up now. You cannot stop halfway. You cannot let discouragement steal the promise that God has already declared over you. Because many people stop one step before the miracle. Many people give up when the answer is about to arrive. Many people allow fatigue to speak louder than faith. But today I tell you, do not stop. Do not back down. Do not let the weight kill your dream. Because what God has promised is still standing. What He has spoken will still come to pass. What seems impossible will merely be another testimony of His power. And when the answer arrives, you will see that it was all part of the plan. You will see that each tear watered the ground of your faith. You will see that every silence from God was a time for growth. You will see that every closed door protected you from what was not meant for you. And then you will not only receive the blessing, you will become a blessing. You will be someone who does not just live miracles, but carries miracles within. You will be someone who does not just experience the power of God, but transmits that power to others. Because when God molds you, He does not mold just for you. He molds so that you can be a channel. He molds so that your life can be a living testimony. He molds so that your faith inspires others to believe as well. So if today you are waiting, know that you are not waiting in vain. If today you feel that time is dragging on, know that God is working. If today you feel that your prayer has not yet been answered, know that there is a greater purpose in this. But what will you do during this waiting time? Will you grumble or will you trust? Will you give up Or will you carry on? Will you focus on what is lacking? Or will you focus on the God who has already declared victory? Because your attitude in the midst of the process determines how your outcome will be. Your posture during the wait defines the size of your testimony. Your faith in the face of difficulty is what transforms the struggle into victory. And listen closely. No one can live this faith for you. No one can decide for you. No one can trust for you. If you want to see God act, you need to make a decision. You need to rise up. You need to declare with your mouth what God has already said about you. You need to stop living as if you are just surviving and start living as if you have already won. Because your victory has already been decreed. Your answer has already been released. Your path has already been prepared. Now it's your turn to take the next step. Now it's your turn to truly believe. Now it's your turn to stop looking at what your eyes can see and start seeing with the eyes of faith. Because when you believe, the impossible becomes possible. When you trust, God opens doors where there were none. When you rise up, the walls come down. And if God is speaking to you today, it's because He wants to take you from where you are. He wants to take you to a new level. He wants you to stop living in mediocrity and begin living in the fullness of what He has for you. But the choice is yours. What will you do? Will you continue living in uncertainty, doubt, and fear? Or will you take possession of what is already yours? Because something powerful happens when you decide to trust, when you decide to believe, when you decide to take a step, even without seeing the ground in front of you. And I ask you, what is stopping you from taking that step? What is still holding you back? What is keeping you in the same place? Because faith requires movement. God cannot guide those who do not walk. God cannot direct those who are stationary. God cannot do something new in those who insist on holding on to the old. So today is the day. Today is the moment. Today is the time to leave behind everything that prevents you from moving forward. If there is fear, cast it away. If there is doubt, declare the truth. If there is insecurity, look to the one who never fails. Because when you move in faith, God moves in your favor. When you take a step, God clears the way. When you choose to trust, God acts. So, stop waiting for everything to be perfect. Stop waiting for all the answers to come before you act. Stop waiting for all the doors to be open before you walk through. Because God did not call you to live in the comfort zone. He called you to live by faith. He called you to trust even when it doesn't make sense. He called you to walk even when your feet don't know where to tread. And if you take that step, if you decide to trust, if you choose to believe, you will see the impossible happen. You will see the supernatural manifest. You will see that God has never left you, never abandoned you, never failed you, because He is faithful. He is powerful. He fulfills what He promises, and if He promised, then it is already done. Now it's your turn to decide, your turn to rise up, your turn to leave behind everything that holds you back and move toward everything God has already prepared for you. Because the promise still stands, God's timing is still being fulfilled, and your victory is already guaranteed. So rise up, believe, trust, move forward, because the best of God is yet to come. Write in the comments, I believe in the strength of God, if you believe that He is supporting you in difficult times. And when you finally stand up, when you decide to trust, when you take that first step, something powerful is going to happen. The chains that bind you will start to break. The weight that has been crushing your heart will begin to disappear. What seemed impossible will begin to become reality right before your eyes, because God did not call you to live a life of defeat. He did not create you to go in circles, to be a prisoner of your fears, or to accept mediocrity as your destiny. There is something greater waiting for you. There is a purpose that goes beyond your understanding, but you need to move. You need to get out of the place where you are. You need to decide that you will no longer allow fear, doubt, and circumstances to dictate your future. And you know what happens when you choose to trust. God begins to open paths where there were once only walls. God starts to transform situations that seemed hopeless. God begins to surprise you in ways you never imagined. Do you remember Joseph, the boy with dreams, the one who was sold into slavery, wronged, forgotten in prison? If anyone had reasons to doubt, to revolt, to believe that God had abandoned him, it was him. But Joseph never stopped believing. He never allowed his circumstances to nullify God's promise for his life. He didn't know how or when, but he knew that God was faithful. And one day, from a cold and dark cell, he was summoned to appear before Pharaoh. In a matter of hours, his life was completely transformed. He went from prisoner to governor. He went from forgotten to exalted. He went from someone without a future to the most powerful man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Do you understand what this means? You might be in your worst moment right now. You could be facing challenges that seem endless. You might be looking around and not seeing any way out. But if God spoke, then wait. If God promised, then keep trusting. Because in the right time, he will call you out of that prison. He will open a door that no one can close. He will lift you up in a way that no one can question. But you can't stop now. You can't allow the delay to make you doubt. You can't give in to the lies of the enemy that say God has forgotten you. Because the truth is that God has never abandoned you. Even when you couldn't see it, he was working. Even when everything seemed lost, he was preparing something. Even when you thought there was no more hope, he already had a plan. But the question is, do you trust that? Can you rest in the assurance that God knows exactly what he's doing? Can you maintain your faith even when everything seems to say otherwise? Because the problem is that many people only trust God when things are going well. They say they believe, but at the first sign of difficulty they start to doubt. They say they wait on the Lord, but when the answer doesn't come in the time they expected, they begin to question. But true faith is not based on what we see. True faith does not depend on circumstances. True faith stands strong even in the desert, even in the prison, even in the storm. Because true faith is not in the promise itself, but in the one who promised. And today, I challenge you to live that faith. I challenge you to trust even without understanding. I challenge you to stop asking when and start declaring, God, I know that in your time everything will come to pass. Because when you decide to trust, your soul finds rest. When you choose to believe, your heart is filled with peace. When you completely surrender yourself into God's hands, anxiety loses its power over you. And that is exactly what the enemy wants to prevent. He wants you to feel restless. He wants you to doubt. He wants you to live full of fear, full of worry, full of insecurity, because he knows that an anxious person cannot hear God's voice. He knows that a person consumed by doubt cannot see the right path. But today, I tell you, don't fall into that trap. Don't let the enemy steal your peace. Don't allow the waiting time to make you doubt God's love and faithfulness, because he is already moving the pieces. He is already preparing the way. He is already orchestrating everything so that at the right moment you will step into what he has promised. And when that day comes, you will see that everything made sense. You will see that every tear had a purpose. You will see that every moment of pain has strengthened you for what is to come. But until then, don't lose focus. Don't get distracted by the wrong voices. Don't give up halfway, because the greatest fight is not about what happens around you, but about what happens inside you. The greatest battle isn't about what others say, but about what you choose to believe. So choose to believe in the truth. Choose to trust in God's faithfulness. Choose to rest in the assurance that he is already in control of everything, because your story is not over yet. Your testimony is still being written, and in due time, you will see that God always knew exactly what he was doing. But today, right now, at this very moment, is your chance to decide. Will you continue to be held captive by fear, or will you rise in faith? Will you keep waiting for everything to be perfect to believe, or will you trust even without seeing? Will you continue to carry burdens that aren't yours, or will you surrender everything into the hands of the one who can do all things? The choice is yours. But know this: God has already decided to bless you. God has already chosen to lift you up. God has already prepared the best for you. Now it's just up to you to decide to walk in this truth. You just need to stop doubting. You just need to live like someone who truly believes. And when you do that, when your faith is greater than your doubt, when your confidence is stronger than your fear, you will see the impossible happen. You will see doors open right before your eyes. You will witness miracles that you never imagined experiencing, because when God decides to act, nothing can stop him. When God chooses to lift someone up, no one can block that. When God says yes, there's no no that can cancel it. So get ready, strengthen yourself, stand firm, because what God has promised is closer than you think. And when it happens, you won't doubt for a second that it was him. You won't doubt that every wait was worth it. You won't doubt that everything, absolutely everything, worked together for your good. But until then, keep believing, keep praying, keep waiting, because at the right time, your victory will come. And when it arrives, you will know that the God who promised is faithful to fulfill. Write in the comments, "I choose to trust," if you believe that God is in control, even in the storms. And when that day comes, when heaven opens up over your life, when the answer that seemed so far away finally arrives, you will understand that every tear shed, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered in silence, all of it was part of a greater plan. You will see that God was never distant, that he never abandoned you, that he never forgot you. You will see that in the right time, everything falls into place, everything makes sense, everything aligns perfectly. But until then, your faith cannot waver, your hope cannot be fragile, your heart cannot be overtaken by doubt, because what keeps you on the path is this unshakable certainty: God is faithful, God does not lie, God does not fail, God is never late, God never gives up on you. And maybe you are feeling tired. Maybe you're thinking that you can't wait any longer. Maybe you feel like your strength is running out. But God wants to remind you today that he is your strength. He wants you to stop relying on your own abilities and start trusting in his power. Because it's not about what you can do. It's not about how hard you try. It's not about how strong you can be. It's about how much you can rest in him. It's about how much you can trust, even when everything seems lost. Have you noticed how the enemy tries to paralyze you? He sends fear. He whispers lies. He creates scenarios in your mind to make you think it's not worth it to keep going. He wants you to look at your mistakes, at your past, at everything that has gone wrong, and think, maybe I'm not worthy of the promise. But listen, it's not about deserving. If it were, no one would be worthy. It's not about perfection. If it were, no one would receive anything. It's about God's grace. It's about his unconditional love. It's about his faithfulness, which never depends on ours, but always reaches us, renews us, sustains us. So stop looking at the failures. Stop focusing on what went wrong. Stop feeding thoughts that only pull you away from the truth. God has already decided to bless you. God has already written your story. God has already determined your destiny. Now, all that's left is for you to truly believe. And when you decide to believe, your attitude will change. You won't walk like someone who is lost, but like someone who knows exactly where they're going. You won't speak like someone without hope, but like someone who has seen the victory even before it happens. And that's what God wants from you today: a change of mindset, a heart fully surrendered, a faith that doesn't waver in the face of time, because God's timing is not like ours. He sees the bigger picture. He perceives what you can't yet see. He knows exactly when the right moment for everything is, and if it hasn't happened yet, it's because He is preparing something better. If it hasn't happened yet, it's because He is taking care of details you can't even imagine. If it hasn't happened yet, it's because He is teaching you something that will be essential when the promise is fulfilled. Now, I ask you, are you willing to trust until the end? Are you willing to hold on tight to God's promises and not let go, no matter how long it takes? Are you willing to say, Lord, I don't understand, but I trust? Because this is the faith that moves mountains. This is the faith that brings miracles. This is the faith that makes the impossible become reality. And if today you decide to live this faith, your life will never be the same. You will see the promises coming to pass. You will see doors opening. You will see God working in every detail, because He never fails. He never makes mistakes. He never forgets those who love Him. So, rise up. Shake off the dust of doubt. Lift your head and keep walking, because your promise is coming. Your miracle is on the way. Your answer has already been released. And in the right time, you will see that God always knew exactly what He was doing.